A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So I'm extremely sorry at the outset that I did not get time to find any motivational quote or personality of the day. So for today, let's directly start with the topics. So this topic is about the HIV/AIDS, which comes under a broader topic of healthcare under your GS syllabus too. So this was a very small topic wherein there was just a small data that you have to remember if you have to mention anything about HIV/AIDS anywhere in your answer. So the data has been released by the National AIDS Control Organization, that is NACO, and for releasing this data, technical support has been given by UNAIDS. So it is NACO plus UNAIDS ka data hai ye. So in this, this data says that in the 9-year period from 2011 to 2020, in the 9-year period, there has been a 66% reduction in the new HIV infections among children, and there has also been a 65% reduction in the AIDS related death in this 9-year period. So the 66% is about the decrease in new infections among children, and the 65% is the decrease in the death in India, HIV related deaths in India. And also the what is more important when it comes to tackling HIV/AIDS is also to prevent the mother to child transmission of HIV/AIDS. So in this case, you have to remember that the number of pregnant women who are living with HIV, that is also reduced from 31,000 in 2010, and that is reduced to 20,000 in 2019. So this data is again very important, which is the number of pregnant women living with HIV. So that's it. That was it about this whole article. So these important data you have to make it in your notes so that we can use it whenever a question is asked on this. So now we move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is the issues with the fertilizer subsidy. So direct and indirect farm subsidies and the issues related to it is a part of your GS3 syllabus. So today in this particular editorial, the government, what is explained is the government is contemplating a measure to cap the number of subsidized fertilizer bags which are to be given to the farmers. So there are definitely several things which are ailing the fertilizer subsidy issue, fertilizer subsidies. So therefore the government is now planning to cap the number of subsidized bags of fertilizers which are given to the farmers. So in this backdrop, the issue of fertilizer subsidy itself will become a very important topic for this year mains. And also, as it is a part of your syllabus directly under GS paper 3 in the name of direct and indirect farm subsidies, so fertilizer subsidy can be a very important issue for this year mains. And if we have to cover this topic very holistically, 3 years before, Economic Survey had covered the issue regarding the fertilizer subsidy very exhaustively and comprehensively. So you don't have to study anything apart from what was given in Economic Survey. So today, as there's not much in the newspaper to be discussed, today we'll be looking into that 3 years before ka Economic Survey and what everything that is related to the fertilizer subsidy, what issues or what is ailing the fertilizer sector, and what we must do, what is a way forward. Everything that was there in that Economic Survey chapter, we'll be discussing that today. So if you have already read that, take this as a kind of revision for you. So let's start with this. So first is the important data that you have to know, which is important whenever you begin any answer. So India is spending nearly 0.5% of its GDP as part of the subsidies that it is giving. So this involves a huge amount, and therefore it's very important to ensure that this is well targeted and is rationalized. But however, out of the 0.5% of the subsidies that the government is giving, if we talk about the fertilizer subsidy, just 35% of the total subsidy that is government is giving to the fertilizer sector, only 35% of that is reaching the small farmers. So now you can imagine the huge amount of diversion that is taking place in the fertilizer sector. So out of the total subsidy that is allocated to the fertilizer sector, which is the second sector to get the highest subsidy after the food subsidy. So out of the total subsidy amount allocated to the fertilizer sector, just 35% is actually going to the small farmers. So the rest of it is going, it is either diverted or is just gotten by the large farmers. So this is an important data which indicates the extent of the problem of how much just a small amount of the subsidy amount is actually going the real beneficiaries. So now let's discuss in this context issues which the fertilizer subsidy or the fertilizer sector is facing. The first is the skewed nature itself. Out of the total amount of fertilizer subsidy that the government is giving, 70% of the total fertilizer subsidy is given to just urea. So therefore, the fertilizer policy itself, the subsidy allocation itself is very skewed, because 70% of the total fertilizer subsidy is being spent on just one fertilizer, which is urea. But Indian soil is also poor in a number of other macro and micronutrients, and they are also not manufactured in good amounts in India, many of which are also imported. So in such a case, 70% of the subsidy amount being spent on a single fertilizer it definitely shows the skewed nature of our fertilizer subsidy policy. This is the first issue. The second is regarding the fact that our current fertilizer subsidy policy is rewarding inefficiency. Now let's see how this is done. Usually in the fertilizer sector, the subsidy is given on a cost plus based means. So now let's understand what is this cost plus based. So let's say there are two fertilizer firms, A and B, and the government has fixed that urea needs to be sold to the farmers at 500 rupees per ton or whatever. So this is the price that is fixed by the government. Now this firm A is manufacturing urea at rupees 1000. So which means government has already fixed the price at 500. So which means that the government is going to give this firm another 500 rupees. Reason being, the cost of manufacturing of the urea by this firm is 1000. But however, this firm is supposed to sell to the farmers at 500 rupees, which is the price fixed by the government. So therefore, the government will reimburse this 500 rupees, which is the difference between the cost and the price that is fixed, to this firm A. Now let us suppose there is another firm B whose cost of manufacturing itself is let's say 800. Cost of manufacturing is 800 and the government has fixed the price at 500, which means this firm is going to receive a subsidy of 800 minus 500, which is 300. Right. So this firm which has a higher cost of manufacturing, which means the inefficient firm is getting more subsidy, and a more efficient firm whose cost of manufacturing is less is actually getting a lesser subsidy. So this shows that inefficiency is being rewarded in the fertilizer sector. Those fertilizer units where the cost of production is high, which are inefficient, will end up getting more subsidy than the more efficient firms. So there is no incentive for the firms to become more efficient, reduce their cost of production, be more resourceful. So there is no incentive for the firms to be more productive. So that is why our entire fertilizer subsidy policy is kind of rewarding inefficiency, where there is no incentive for the fertilizer firms to reduce their cost of production. This is the second important issue that is facing the fertilizer sector. Now the third important thing is the controlled MRP. So MRP, as we all know, is the maximum retail price. So in this case, when we talk about the fertilizer sector, even though the P and K, that is the potash and the phosphorus, even they are important. So that is why we call it as the NPK ratio. So even when they are important, their prices are decontrolled. So the potash and the phosphorus fertilizers are sold in the market at the prices which the firms are free to set. Of course, they must be in the reasonable limits. But for the case of urea, the price is still controlled by the government. So the MRP of urea is still controlled, which is very, very less compared to the other fertilizers. In yesterday's discussion, we saw how the MRP of urea has just increased by just 11% in the last one decade, while the MRP of the P and K have increased by more than 4 times in the last one decade. So that therefore we know that the MRP of urea is very, very less, and it is sold in the market which is underpriced. So because urea is available at such cheap rates, it means that there is a lot of incentive to divert this urea that is meant for agricultural produce for something else. Urea also has a lot of industrial uses. So urea is used for industries like which are making plywood. So they are used in laboratories, medical uses, as flavor enhancing additives. It is used in the manufacturing of cigarettes, in the automobile systems. So urea has a lot of uses. So when urea is being underpriced by the government, there is always an incentive to divert the urea from agricultural use and take it to the commercial or industrial use. And also in countries like Nepal and Bhutan or Bangladesh, urea is actually priced very high. So therefore it makes sense to divert urea that is meant for agricultural use in India and is even transported across the border, or it is diverted to various commercial uses in India itself. Because the urea for commercial use is actually expensive, so therefore urea is usually taken that it is meant for agricultural use, but then it is going to be diverted. So it is because of this diversion of urea that there is a shortage of urea for the genuine small farmers. Urea being underpriced and therefore an incentive to divert, and once the urea is diverted, it goes on for the industrial use and there is shortage for the small farmers and they don't find urea at the subsidized rates. So this compels the small farmers to go and buy urea at very high prices in the market, because the subsidized urea has already been diverted for industrial and commercial use. So the small farmers are the most worst sufferers here, because they usually will have to go to the market and buy urea at much higher prices. So this also covers the fifth issue along with the controlled MRP issue. So controlled MRP issue just says that the price of urea is underpriced. It is controlled by the government, so therefore there is smuggling across the border and also diversion for industrial uses, and this makes urea for agricultural use, it will lead to shortages and scarcity. So from this, the another issue that comes out of this is that the small farmers will find it very difficult to have access to subsidized urea, and therefore they will have to usually buy urea at much higher rates in the market. So this affects the small farmers. Why? Because the large farmers already have good networks and they can somehow get the subsidized urea, but it is the small farmers who are always the worst sufferers, and due to shortage of the subsidized urea, they will have to buy it at expensive prices. The next issue is a canalization of imports. Now this means that the government has just fixed 3 entities which are going to import urea from abroad. So only these 3 entities can import and none of the others can do. So only these 3 PSUs can import urea. So and not just that, the government has because told that only 3 firms can import urea and no other firm can. So there is definitely going to be a lot of shortage in the urea. We yesterday saw that the consumption of urea has increased, but only 3 firms importing the urea and not giving that freedom to the rest of the other firms. It means that the urea may not be imported in the required quantities, and it might amount to shortage of urea in the domestic market for the farmers. So this kind of controlling that is done by the government, that is even telling the entities which are the entities that can import, so that is too much of a restriction, and therefore enough quantities of fertilizers may not be imported by just 3 PSUs, and this might again create shortages and scarcity in the domestic market, leading to a price rise in the domestic market. Again, this is going to impact the small farmers the worst. The last issue is related to the movement that is being controlled. The government always controls the movement of urea, that is how much urea must be imported and what quantities must be imported, how it should be sold and where it should be sold, in which districts it has to be sold and transported. All of that is controlled by the government. So because of this movement control, this has a lot of limitation. Because if the government does not forecast well in advance that this is the amount of urea that may be required in this farming season, and it ends up importing less, and also it controls the movement of urea within the country. So what if the government doesn't forecast the demands in the domestic market well in advance and also correctly, and we end up importing less urea, or the urea where it is needed the most, it doesn't reach there. Again, it leads to a price rise in the local market, and the farmers are going to be the worst sufferers. So these are the various issues that are associated with the fertilizer subsidy. The economic also goes on to suggest the way forward, what steps we need to take to come out of this situation. First is decanalization of imports. Now that only 3 PSUs are allowed to import, we need to give freedom to a lot of other PSUs as well to be able to import urea, so that there is no scarcity in the domestic market and consequently there is no resultant price rise. The second is that urea must be brought under the nutrient-based subsidy scheme. So nutrient-based subsidy incorporates the phosphorus and the potash-based fertilizers. So wherein the subsidy that the government gives is based on the weight of the nutrients which are present in per kg of the fertilizer. So similarly, the economic survey has suggested that even urea must be brought under the nutrient-based subsidy, where based on the presence of urea in the fertilizer, the government has to give the subsidy. This will help to do away with the inefficient fertilizer firms who have high cost of production, and they end up getting more subsidies. So we have to exit them, we have to rule them off from the economy. So that is why it is best to bring urea under the nutrient-based scheme. The third suggestion is the utilization of JAM Trinity, that is Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and Mobile. So this can be used even in the case of fertilizers. Now we had direct benefit transfer for the LPG cylinders, and that was working well. So similarly, economic survey suggested that the JAM model could be extended even for the fertilizers. So where the farmers will have to go to the retail shop, and there they will have to provide their biometric authentication and register there, and only after that they must be sold the subsidized bags of fertilizers. So this JAM Trinity can be incorporated because fertilizer sector is also not very labor intensive, and it is also going to reduce the using the JAM is also going to reduce a huge amount of diversion of subsidized fertilizer which is going off for the commercial uses. So that loophole can be plugged, and that leakage of the subsidized fertilizer can be plugged by using the JAM model. So this is what should be done, is what the economic survey says. Next is capping the subsidized bags. So this is what the government is currently deliberating. So just like we have capped the LPG cylinders at say 12 cylinders per year, similarly we can also cap the number of bags per year, the number of bags of subsidized fertilizer per year for a farmer. Let's say if we say it is 100 bags, then 100 bags will be enough for a farmer per year, which will be the subsidized fertilizer. And above and over the 100 bags, then definitely it is going to be some large farmer who will need more than that, and a large farmer can anytime afford to buy an unsubsidized bag, which is going to be his 101st bag. So just some number of subsidized fertilizer bags can be provided to the farmers, and that will help the small farmers, and the large farmers can any day afford the more number of bags if and when they want. So this is what the government is now deliberating. Also, the economic survey talks about rationalizing the subsidies. So here it means that those firms which are inefficient are now getting more subsidies. So rationalizing the subsidies means our policies should be made in such a way that these inefficient firms are ruled out and they don't end up getting the maximum amount of subsidies. So this is how we are going to rationalize subsidies. The next is to have a long-term strategy, because in whatever we do, we still will have some of the unmet domestic demand which will have to be met by some imports. So we will have to be importing, and therefore we will have to seek out options from where imports are going to be cheap. One very good example for that is the Ministry of Fertilizer, in a joint venture in Oman, has started a fertilizer plant from where the import was very cheap. So that could manufacture cheap imports because of the availability of gas and all in that region. Similarly, we have to have a long-term vision and a long-term strategy, and we should have overseas presence where we could manufacture fertilizer in areas where that would be very cheap for us. So this should be our long-term strategy. So this is about the entire fertilizer sector and the fertilizer subsidies and the various issues associated with it, and what should be the way forward. All of this directly from the economic survey. So these were the other articles that were not important from the exam point of view. Here there was one article on the new digital health ID, about which we have already discussed in detail before. So if you have not watched that, go watch the digital health ID. This is again one question which is important this year because of the issues related to health which have been in the news. So rest of the others were on the India-China relations. Again, India-China relations we have covered very holistically before, so there was nothing new in this. And this good neighbor was an article that spoke about the Bangladesh journey. So yesterday or day before yesterday, when we were discussing something, we discussed how Bangladesh's per capita GDP could be little more than India's in this year, and after that is again going to be the reverse. But however, it has grown tremendously well. So in this context, this article was discussing about Bangladesh's journey, which is again not very much relevant for our answers. So these were the articles. So I did not have any relevant content. So yesterday we took up a question about what is judicial accountability, what is its importance, and what needs to be done about it. And yes, in this question also many of you have written really good answer in the comment section. Whoever has written in the comment section, I have gone through all the answers. So basically, when you're talking about the issues of accountability, as I say in mains answer writing, what is more important for us is to be able to come out with more number of points and increase the width of your answer and not the depth of your answer. That is, for each point you don't have to give an explanation of 3 to 4 lines, but then with just 1 or 2 lines of explanation, try to write more number of points. So this is the key to answer writing when it comes to in whatever paper. So this is the key that you have to adopt. And also, because the question has 3 parts, you have to allocate accordingly your space and time for all the 3 parts, very important. And once you are done writing the answer, you have to see you have to keep seeing whether you are covering all the parts of the question, because there is a very good chance that you might miss out on any of the part. So when we talk of any issues related to accountability, there are so many things that come into our mind. One is the fact that judiciary is the guardian of our constitution. That is a final interpreter of the constitution. So therefore, if the constitution, which is the law of the land, has to be protected, then has to be taken guard of, then it is very important that the judiciary is held accountable. There are so many other issues or powers, like the judiciary has the power to declare laws as null and void. So that is also the reason why it should be held accountable. Judiciary itself has a lot of backlog of cases. There are more than 3 lakh cases which are pending before the judiciary. So the judiciary itself is not performing its duties properly, which it is supposed to. So there is a huge backlog. Then it is not dealing with many of the constitutional important cases, so it is mired with a lot of PILs and such stuff. So the important constitutional cases are not being heard by judiciary, or any significant cases. For instance, the Citizenship Amendment Act is not being heard. So like that, several important cases are not heard by judiciary. Then as far as appointments is concerned, we discussed yesterday how the collegium system is actually leading to the judges appointing the judges, and it is leading to some favoritism, nepotism and corruption, and the bright minds not being elevated to the higher judiciary. So that is another reason why there has to be more accountability. Then we also have the judges who are taking up appointments, political appointments, soon after their retirement. So this shows a kind of nexus between the two. So this is one more thing why we need accountability. Then there have been charges of corruption and even sexual harassment against the judges, examples of which we saw yesterday. So this is another reason. We have the judicial activism and the utilization of Article 142, under which the court gets the power to do anything to serve complete justice on any particular case. So when using this power, the court sometimes kind of breaches its own boundaries and comes into the sphere of the legislator and the executive, and that leads to judicial adventurism, which is again very it disturbs the delicate balance between the three arms of the state, so which is actually needs to be which actually needs to be preserved. Then of course there are other smaller issues like the master of roster system, where the Chief Justice decides the bench to which particular cases will have to go. So taking up some of the politically sensitive cases to benches on which he himself is sitting, maybe. So because there is some kind of an unholy nexus. So there are various. Then 11th reason is also the recent increase in the misuse of contempt powers, like what we have discussed in previously about the Prashant Bhushan case. So just by listing these cases where we need accountability, we have already found 11 issues. So 10 you can you can mention without any problem. So you have lot number of issues in your mind. So this is what is important. This is the reason why we are practicing this answer writing now daily is because you must be able to come out with 10 to 11 points in no time. So if your brain is able to do that, that is what is going to save you on the day of the exam. On the day of the exam, you should not come across some question which is so surprising for you and you are not able to come out with more than 3-4 issues about judicial accountability. So that should not happen. So it is better that you are going through this exercise now and you are preparing yourself for that. So we have listed enough number of issues. When it comes to solution, again you can take up each of these things and then you can talk about the solutions for them. So for example, when we talk of the master roster system, then there was a suggestion that the Supreme Court itself must have kind of 3 divisions, where there is an admission division into which all the PILs can go. Then there should be a constitutional division which will look into all the important constitutional cases, and then an appellate division, so that accordingly the cases will be given to these benches. There must be transparency in the court proceedings. Then we must have there's also a suggestion for having a code of conduct for the judges. So that is also very important. Then again, Contempt of Court Act must be amended so that we remove the words like scandalizing the authority of the court, and then we kind of moderate that. And also there is another suggestion of having a judicial lokpal, so that the judges are held accountable. And you must never fail to mention the Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill. So when you talk about this bill is so important that it is not just enough to mention about this bill. You must write a clause or two about this bill to explain how important this bill is. So this bill has been talking about the fact that the judges must declare their assets and liabilities of not just themselves but also of their spouse and children. And secondly, this bill talks about what is called as a National Judicial Oversight Committee. So this National Judicial Oversight Committee will accept complaints against the judges from the citizens also, and it is going to go through that, and then there is going to be an inquiry about it. So this oversight committee, the National Judicial Oversight Committee, which is proposed under this bill, is also very important. So these kinds of components of this bill must also be written, at least 1 or 2 you have to write, so that it comes out as the basic content of this bill and how important the introduction of this bill is for ensuring the judicial accountability. And this is about the discussion of the content. And yes, some of you have written really well. Some of you have also, when I read your answers, I know for a fact that you've been following ICAN very sincerely, because you are incorporating the previously discussed examples into your current answers. For example, I found somebody who has given the example of under the contempt, how the contempt provisions should be used very judiciously. In that, somebody has given the example of the UK. So United Kingdom also had this, but then now they are not using this provision of contempt, and there the judges have themselves had this convention that the criticism should not mean contempt. And for that, the example we had discussed was about how the judiciary, after the Brexit decision, how many leading newspapers in UK had criticized the judges as saying the judges as old fools, but still the judge ended up saying that yes, it is actually true that I am old, and whether I am fool or not is very subjective interpretation. So I don't want to comment upon this issue. So this is what the judge had told, and we had discussed this in our discussion on contempt provisions. So this shows how you have been consistently following, and also even if you're following and making notes, if you're not revising, then I'm sure this example will never occur to your mind to write in this particular question. It's only when you revise your notes while you keep it in an organized manner that you can make a difference by writing these examples. So writing examples is very important. When you are writing about contempt, do mention the Prashant Bhushan case. When you are saying that important cases are not being taken up, so just don't stop there, because I don't know what were, at least give me one example of the important cases which are not taken up by the judiciary. For example, the Citizenship Amendment Act. So you have to write some examples. That's one thing. And some of you have written very good keywords. Somebody has written bench shopping, which is about the master of roaster system, which was there in news 2-3 years before. So bench shopping is a very good keyword which can be used, and you have to underline such keywords. And if possible, if it doesn't cause a break in your speed, you should also try writing this in block letters so that it gets highlighted when the evaluator is going through your answer. And some of you have also spoken about having a performance appraisal system for the judges, which is again a very innovative suggestion. And one of you have even mentioned AP Shah in the conclusion. AP Shah committee, or rather Justice AP Shah has been mentioned in the conclusion, that how it's important to balance the two wheels of, there must be equilibrium. On the one hand we have the judicial independence, and on the other hand we have judicial accountability. So both of them needs to be balanced, and there must be equilibrium between the two. So this is what AP Shah had remarked, and some of you have written that also, so which is very good. So keep doing the hard work. And today's question is, what reforms should be brought about in the Indian healthcare sector? Because healthcare is a very important sector for this year, so it's very important for you to know this. And also, when even if we know a lot about the healthcare sector, but when some question comes as a very broader question, it's very difficult for us to write everything in just 150 words. So you have to practice these kind of questions which are broad, where you have a lot of content, but then you have to prioritize to somehow give everything in 150 words. So right answer to this. That's it for today. Thank you.